most dramatic episodes in the Monster vs. Saga went a little different, and probably even more chaotic. On this episode of Goji Center, we explore how one audacious avian might have changed the lives of millions of people on the planet had he been a bit more aggressive and a few factors stacked up in their favor. As the old saying about the butterfly effect goes, an insect flapping its wings can change the course of a hurricane. So, how might fate change under the burning wings of this terrible titan? Time to find out what would happen if Rodan refused to bow. Let's set the stage to start things off. The monster we know as Rodan had been a staple of the Godzilla franchise since their first crossover in the 1960s, after Big Bird and Company starred in their own feature film a few years after Godzilla kicked off the genre. In their first outing, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, Rodan, and Godzilla initially quarreled before following young Mothra's example and uniting their power against King Ghidorah. For the rest of the Showa era, Rodan allied with Godzilla and the other monsters of Earth several more times. In the Heisei saga, a new version of Rodan and Godzilla initially came to blows before Rodan chose to sacrifice themselves to give Godzilla the power needed to destroy his mechanical doppelganger. And in the monster mash that was Final Wars, mind-controlled Rodan was coerced into battling Godzilla alongside other former allies Anguirus and King Caesar, notably spared after getting knocked out. This was why this exact moment when Rodan submitted to King Ghidorah stood out so much. Things had to be dire for a monster infamously willing to throw down with Godzilla and then unite against even greater forces in past incarnations to be the one winding up bending the knee. So, is there a way for the volcanic menace to wind up standing against a titan like Ghidorah instead of bowing down? In a word, yes. And all it would take is just a few changes in how it all went down, whether by fate, luck, or just an unlucky slip-up from Ghidorah. Rodan infamously was the only titan other than Godzilla and Mothra to initially resist King Ghidorah, being willing to square up and battle the dragon multiple times his size in a one-on-one. What exactly constitutes the ability for a titan species to be considered a potential alpha is a bit vague across the monsterverse. But considering Rodan is at least on par with titans like Camazotz, who can give confirmed potential alphas like Kong a hard time, it's possible the Fire Demon being capable of having that status too was one of the reasons he stood up to fighting King Ghidorah and was briefly even willing to battle Godzilla. And while Big Bird did go down, he was holding his own for a time against the three-headed terror. It took a prolonged, practically point-blank gravity beam assault to knock him out, with the current of the ocean carrying him further away after he crashed into it. Now, we don't know exactly what was going on with Rodan when he was off-screen during the battle between Godzilla and Ghidorah, but we can presume he was out of range when the oxygen destroyer went off and struck down the G-Man. Right here is where fate could have changed. Instead of getting a firm hold and forcing Rodan to eat a face full of gravitons, in this timeline, King Ghidorah only managed to get a hold of one wing with a looser grip on the other. This meant when he blasted Rodan, the force wrenched Rodan out of his hold and allowed him to roll with the impact. He still took a heavy blow, but getting blasted backwards without being held down dampened the impact. This means Rodan was able to recover from the onslaught a lot quicker, and even saw Godzilla engage Ghidorah. Rodan is cantankerous enough, they might just jump right back in themselves to re-engage. But with the fight getting dragged underwater, it might force them to break off. Past versions of Rodan, Showa, have dove into the water just fine, but we don't know how the legendary version, covered in volcanic rock and magma, would fare. Hovering over the battle, Rodan would notice the missile carrying the oxygen destroyer coming and have time to react. They have no idea what the payload is. In fact, just a few minutes earlier might have been Big Bird's first time ever seeing missiles. But they are smart enough to know that if the little ones from earlier stung, a big one like that is bound to hurt. Due caution would keep Rodan out of range when the oxygen destroyer goes off. But right afterwards is where it gets tricky.
Your personal finances start with you, but they support your entire home team. With Thrivent, your money can be a force for good for the people, causes, and communities you're most thankful for. Thrivent, where money means more.
King Ghidorah was not in the best of states after bursting free from the surf. While they were immune to the oxygen destroyer, he had been running on a diminishing tank after 2 fights with Godzilla, flying around the planet, the aerial clash with Rodan, and hadn't had any time to recharge or reinvigorate his healing factor. In the original timeline, Rodan woke up to Godzilla seemingly dead, King Ghidorah already having used his volcano to jumpstart his regeneration, and making an alpha call to declare his now uncontested dominion. Now we have a Rodan who is closer to fighting fresh, saw Ghidorah take heavy damage, and the one who is many is down ahead, riddled with wounds, and is the weakest he has been since waking up. Let's remember, this is the same Rodan who was willing to square up and challenge Godzilla. A Godzilla who had just nuked a whole city, while Rodan was sporting a perforated pectoral courtesy of a mad matriarch moth monster. If he has the gumption to do that, he has the guts to do this. In a fair fight, Rodan wouldn't stand a chance, but this wouldn't be a fair fight. Ghidorah, still trying to recover from nearly getting ripped apart by Godzilla, would get ambushed mid-air and be sent crashing down onto the island. Already faster and more maneuverable in the air compared to the alien dragon, if Rodan can keep Ghidorah grounded, he has a decisive advantage. Repeated dive bombs, drop kicks, and focusing on attacking Ghidorah's back or remaining 2 heads could cause some gnarly damage. So is this the timeline where the fire demon overcomes King Ghidorah and crowns himself as the new Alpha Titan? Rodan, we love you on this channel, but that ain't happening unless you decide to bust out a new evolved form, too. Short of some speculative miracle work dunking King Ghidorah into the volcano and hoping it hurts him, Rodan wouldn't do much other than wound and stall the 2-headed false king. Eventually, King Ghidorah is going to land another hit with his gravity beams, and that could prove trouble enough. Rodan would cut his losses and fall back, with Ghidorah too injured and slow to chase him down. Monster Zero would still proclaim themselves the new Alpha Titan, only after being delayed by some minutes fending off Rodan. But these few minutes might yet prove critical, because while a majority of the Titans fell in line with the False King, several of them opposed the new order. Kong wouldn't be much of a factor on his island, but an Alpha-adjacent Titan would have metamorphosed by the time Ghidorah announced his Alpha call. Mothra was already aware that Godzilla was still alive and communicating with him even in the G-Man's weakened state. The Queen of the Monsters is a diplomatic one. We've seen her strike alliances even with former foes of Godzilla, like what would happen in Egypt years later. And alongside her rallying human allies to help Godzilla, there now would be one cantankerous Titan who might just be angry enough to want to go round 3 with King Ghidorah. And with Godzilla revived thanks to Dr. Serizawa, Rodan would be able to put 2 and 2 together that they had a fighting chance now. With more reason to hate Ghidorah and seeing the original Alpha is still fighting fit, Rodan wouldn't be changing sides this time. King Ghidorah, meanwhile, would have still rampaged across the United States, only now without a high-speed right-hand man to lead the slaughter in the Battle of Washington, D.C. He can still get the job done more than handily enough on his own, with the G-Team and the military only able to stall him. But inevitably, Madison is going to pull the same stunt she did at Boston and get his attention. And when Godzilla comes ashore, he's coming with backup of both the human and titanic variety. If this, Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra all together against King Ghidorah, looks familiar, it should. This was something of an idea floated for a King of the Monsters production. If a final battle like this happened, Ghidorah would be at a serious disadvantage. He was already getting pressed with just Godzilla and Mothra briefly tag-teaming him. A 3-on-1 with the Toho trio jumping him is just too much. Ghidorah absolutely would try to summon the other Titans for backup, but none of the ones that answered the call or were close enough to get to Boston by daybreak could fly. Unless a Titan like Camazotz decides to break off their attack on the west coast to book it to Boston as fast as possible, the one who is many stands alone without any air support. Now, even if the Lord of Bats decided to help and could get there in time, a juiced-up Godzilla could keep King Ghidorah busy long enough for Mothra and Rodan to gang up on their aerial adversary, or for Rodan to run the 1v1 with Camazotz as Mothra helps Godzilla. Without his aerial ally occupied or disabled, Godzilla wouldn't be vulnerable to getting dragged into the atmosphere and dropped, even if Ghidorah manages to pull off the stunt he did with the power station. No Mothra sacrifice means no burning Godzilla. But between the three of them dismembering Ghidorah and burning what remains away between Godzilla's beam and Rodan's heat, the would-be conqueror from the stars would still meet their end. And who knows, maybe Rodan would get creative, flying the carcass back to his volcano after all, if they decide putting what's left of King Ghidorah on ice again isn't an option. By fire and claw, and possibly having to battle more than one foe for his title of King of the Skies, a defiant Rodan gets a seat at the victor's table. But what if things went sideways in a different way? What if Rodan felt the need to even the playing field and sought a fiery evolution to bring their power to the next level and contest the crown themselves? Let us know in the comments below if you'd like to see some of that or other scenarios down the line.